All right. Um, Lots of exciting stuff going on this weekend. Most importantly, my sister had a birthday. I will not tell you what birthday she had because she'd kill me, but I love spending time with family. Um, anyway, all right, we're going to get started on part seven. Part seven is focusing, we kind of dovetailed into it a little bit in part six, but this is talking about Colombia. And when this book was written, and let me go back and just emphasize when that was, because timing, this was written in 2003. Because he starts off the chapter saying that we didn't know a whole lot about Colombia. Well, we know a whole lot about Colombia now. But he starts basically back when the CIA in the 1960s began training the Colombian police officers in sabotage and terror tactics. And where have we seen that before? That is the Office of Public Safety and the USAID. At the time, it was AID, and their program that they trained police to be basically terrorists. Um, the resulting involvement with paramilitary in Colombia basically blurred the lines between national police, local police, and the actual paramilitary terrorists that were protecting the poppy field as they were moving production into Latin America. In the early 1990s, according to Human Rights Watch, this is a quote: a U.S. Defense Department and CIA team worked with Colombian military officers on the 1991 intelligence reorganization that resulted in the creation of killer networks, basically death squads, that identified and killed civilians suspected of supporting the rebels that wanted their property back and didn't want Colombia turned into a narco state. Um, so they were focusing on killing civilians, and they primarily attack women and children for the biggest bang for their buck on the terror tactics. And that's what's so important. And also notice the timing: 1991. 1991 is when we were moving away from the boogeyman of the Soviet Union and the refocusing of our efforts into the radical Islamic terrorist. Former U.S. military attaché Colonel James Roach, ROACH, who worked on the reorganization, has said since his retirement that the CIA was the major partner in the reorganization and even financed the networks. These are drug networks to protect opium flows, and the CIA was financing it. Drug trafficking and right wing terrorist activity have been linked in Colombia for at least the last 30 years. And of course, he's talking from a 2003 perspective, so since the late 60s, early 70s. The evidence suggests that the Colombian state security apparatus, in conjunction with the CIA, has had continuing contact with this nexus and may even have played a major role in basically the creation of it. The story goes back to Alianza Anticomunista Americano in the 1970s, an international network centered in Argentina that targeted revolutionaries with the assistance of CIA trained Cuban American terrorists, the Cuban exiles that were basically the United States Operation Gladio operatives. And the Anti-Comunista was the foundation of the World Anti-Communist League in Latin America, as we disclosed on the Alpha Warrior show. Left-wing sources have claimed that the AAA, again, basically it's an Alliance Anti-Communist Americans, AAA, operated in Colombia as part of a state security apparatus with the CIA's backing. It seems clear that the CIA had an ongoing relationship with some paramilitary units dating back at least to the creation of MAS. MAS is Spanish words, and it's basically identified as a terrorist organization. And its origins, as far as this book is concerned, was 1981. And of course, 1981 is the beginning of the Reagan administration and the beginning of the planning for the Contras in order to be able to overthrow the government of Nicaragua for United Fruit. In the 1980s, MAS functioned as a working coalition between the army and the drug cartels against FARC and its political arm, the Union of Patriots. That was basically the political party associated with the rebels that wanted the CIA and the drug traffickers out of Colombia, called the FARC. And of course, we've been taught in our history classes that the FARC were basically communists that were trying to overthrow a perfectly fine democratic government, when in fact the government and the paramilitaries were trained and equipped by the CIA. One alliance that he highlights is Santiago Ocampo. You spell his last name Ocampo. He was basically in charge of the Cali cartel and dual-hatted as the president of MAS, which is basically a terrorist organization that we funded. He was able to travel in and out of the United States with zero difficulty. The DEA officers tried to target him, the good ones, and were thwarted at every opportunity by the CIA. They petitioned the State Department, basically said he was a terrorist, and they didn't have a problem with him coming and going from the United States because the State Department and the CIA functions as one organization. And of course, this is during the 1980s, where we were clearly funding terrorists all over. Another is the same Israeli instructors who worked for Ocampo and MAS in Colombia, and they worked for U.S.-backed Contras in Honduras, as well as the Guatemalan army. And we've discovered this nexus between the CIA, the Israeli Mossad, and these terrorist organizations in Latin America moving drugs. In Colombia is like that. This is where Eaton was, EITAN, that we've talked about ad nauseum. There was, and this is where we discovered, and I don't know whether, I don't remember, I finished the book this weekend, but I don't remember if in this chapter he talks about it. But just to reemphasize this, all of these terrorist organizations send their terrorist trainees to Terrorism 101. That was the School of Americas that moved to the Hemispheric whatever school at Fort Benning. That was Terrorism 101. Terrorism 102 was hosted in Taiwan at the Taiwanese Political Warfare Cadre, and Terrorism 103 was hosted in Israel, and that was reserved for the people that they wanted to actually run the networks, like the leadership of it. And that was a 1-year, all expense paid trip that was basically ran by the IDF, not Mossad, the Israeli Defense Forces. So it was a whole of government sponsorship of what was going on in Latin America in conjunction with the CIA. Okay. The work drew the comment from a general in the Israeli Cresset that Israel is the dirty work contractor for the U.S. administration. Israel is acting as an accomplice and an arm of the United States. The Ocampo's drug ally in Honduras, Juan Ramon Mata, Ballesteros. Let me spell that last name. Ballesteros was untouchable until the U.S. Contra support effort was closed down in 1988 at the end of the Reagan administration. The CIA and in its wake, the U.S. State Department had contracted all air support business for the Contras in Honduras to Mata's airline, and the name of his airline was Setco, Setco, which we've come across before. It basically was acting as a CIA front. And remember, in all of these operations, the sea transport goes to CIA operatives, CIA front companies. The air transport goes to CIA fronts, so that the CIA is making money the entire time they're committing terrorism or drug operations. It is, and I'm not even talking about the sale of the drugs. I'm talking about the actual operation. It is relevant that in the 1980s, cocaine from Colombia was helping to finance nearly all of the competing factions of the CIA supported Contras in Central America. It is indeed a long established practice for the CIA to allow its client armies to supplement their income through drug trafficking. You know, a lesson they learned from Chiang Kai shek. Sometimes with agency assistance, both in Burma and Laos in the 1950s and 60s, to the CIA, Islamic guerrilla army of Hek Martyr in the 1980s. That's how they get local cooperations. This was thanks in part to CIA assistance and protection. Hek Martyr became, for a while, one of the leading heroin suppliers in the world. With alleged encouragement from the CIA director Casey, Colombian cocaine also began in this period to enter the Soviet Union via Hek Martyr's Mujahideen in Afghanistan, the apparent precursor to today's massive cocaine trade trafficking Colombian cartels to Russia's so-called Red Mafia. The U.S. government did not merely condone the drug trafficking of most of the Contra factions. It favored known drug traffickers with government contracts and intervened to prevent recipient drug cases from being prosecuted. Active in the latter role was a chief assistant U.S. attorney in Miami by the name of Richard Gregory, Gregorie. He later became responsible for the indictment of Manuel Noriega. And why is that? Because Noriega stepped out of line. Gregory was backed in his efforts by the number 3 justice official in Washington, D.C., a guy by the name of Mark Richard. In the crucial year of 1986, Richard was awarded a contract by the CIA for protection of national security during criminal prosecutions. Isn't that special? This U.S. government's protection of the Contras affected U.S. drug policy overall, and particularly in Colombia. A concerted U.S. propaganda campaign was mounted in 1984 against alleged drug trafficking by a conspiracy involving Nicaraguan Sandinistas, Colombian narco guerrillas, and traffickers of the Medellin cartel, notably Carlos Leder, Hechder, and Pablo Escobar. This campaign distorted the truth in 2 related aspects. It falsely implicated FARC and rewrote history to create references to the Medellin cartel's competitors in Cali. For example, the major cocaine plant that was raided in 1984 was said by U.S. authorities to have been guarded by the FARC and planted by the Medellin cartel. In fact, The plant had been protected by the US trained Colombian army and planted at a joint meeting in Cali. Drug traffickers and shipments that had once been leaked to Cali were now, like MAS itself, reattributed by the US government to the Medellin cartel. Thus, the vigorous prosecution of the Medellin cartel both abated and protected the ongoing CIA sponsored cartel, the one that they preferred. So every single drug trafficking bust or whatever during all of this had nothing to do with cracking down on drugs. It had everything to do with tracking down on drug competition. Many of the 1984 charges of the Sandinista Medellin FARC alliance came from the U.S. ambassador in Bogota, Louis Tams, T-A-M-B-S. Tams was an unusually ideological political appointee who on drug matters took direction not from the State Department, but from William Clark, Reagan's national security advisor. But Tams' charges were supported by official testimony before congressional committees and above all by the U.S. Justice Department. A whole of government effort. And by 1984, the same Richard Gagari, who would bury the Contra support drug case linked the Nicaraguan Sandinistas to drug trafficking by bringing the first of two indictments against Leder and Escobar and a Sandinista official. For this, he relied on the testimony and controversial photographs of former CIA contractor Barry Seal, the photographs having been taken from a CIA-equipped plane. Thus, the indictments named, in addition to 5 traffickers in the Medellin cartel, Pablo Escobar and Carlos Leder. It also named Federico Vaughn, an alleged assistant to Tomas Borgay, the Nicaraguan Minister of Interior. The second indictment against the Medellin cartel and the Sandinistas was released by Gagari to the press November 18, 1986, one day before President Reagan's press conference about the Iran-Contra scandal. So they needed good news of an indictment because they were going to break the bad news the next day that the Reagan administration was behind the whole damn thing. Nothing like manipulating the press or anything like that. After DEA Administrator Lawn, L-A-W-N, himself expressed doubts about the involvement of Borgay, the U.S. focused more particularly on Leder, who was accused of links both to the revolutionary M19 movement and to Fidel Castro, because they all have to be a communist. In February 1987, Leder was captured and extradited to the U.S., having been betrayed by Escobar in connection with the deal that he had proposed to the U.S. Attorney General Ed Meese. This was the first in a series of dramatic drug busts of U.S. targets in Colombia, bust abetted not just by law enforcement, but by competing traffickers, ones backed up by the CIA. That's the most important foot stomp of all of this. This unlikely alliance with M19 was used by then Vice President George Bush to justify National Security Defense Directive 221 of April 1986. For the first time, it defined drug trafficking as a national security matter, allowing for the use of U.S. troops in Colombia in alliance with the CIA. In retrospect, that directive and a follow-up directive signed by Bush in the summer of 1989, because he's now in office, has proven to be the executive equivalent to the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution of 1964, leading to the direct involvement of U.S. military in another nation's civil war. And I would argue it's not even a civil war. There would have been no war in Colombia had the CIA kept their ass out of it. It was the CIA basically taking over the entire country, and a few rebels up in the hills that wanted them out. Like the Gulf in Tonkin, NSDD 221 was justified by allegedly hard intelligence data that has since completely been discredited. When Vice President Bush announced the directive in July of 1986, this is a quote, charged the Sandinista government in Nicaragua with using money from illegal drugs to finance international terror. Talking about the pot calling the kettle black. They blamed Castro for harboring airplanes used for drug smuggling and alleged that there was a drug connection behind the 1985 assault on Colombia's Palace of Justice by M19 guerrillas, in which 100 people were killed, including 12 Supreme Court justices. He said Colombian authorities discovered after the siege that the rebels had destroyed all U.S. extradition requests for Colombia's major drug traffickers. Huh. Who would want to destroy them? The rebels that want all of that shit out of their country? No. The entire thing was a false flag set up by the CIA. When you look back on this stuff, it is so blatantly clear what is going on. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. History has validated the DEA's coolness at the time to these claims, especially the last one. It was almost certainly the Army's counterattack against the M19 that killed the justices and destroyed the files. Of course it was. Do you think the people that wanted this shit out of their country is going to tear up the files that's going to get the people out of their country? I mean, it's like a 3-year-old wrote the script. The enlarged U.S. presence in Colombia following this directive produced not order, but an escalation of violence everywhere. This reached a peak in 1989 when a Colombian commercial airliner was blown up, killing all 110 passengers, but not the presidential candidate who had been the target. In September, the new Bush administration, treating such violence as a national security matter, launched the Andrean Initiative with a new directive authorizing an expanded role of U.S. military in Latin America's drug war. At the same time, the CIA station chief in Bogota grew to a size of nearly 100. That's just the CIA, making it the largest CIA station in the world at the time. Again, that tells you everything. Although the new U.S. and let me just say this. This is at a time when we are supposed to believe that the beginnings of this terrorism thing is going on all around the world. And we're wasting a bunch of shit in what they described as a civil war in Colombia. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Who believes that crap? Although the new U.S. interagency presence brought the latest technology to the pursuit of targeted drug traffickers, a key role continued to be played by the alliance with other traffickers, notably the Cali cartel. It is not disputed that in 1993, and let me go back to this thing about the photographs on the tarmac. I meant to say that taken by the CIA plane. The entire thing was staged. We learned that, and I don't remember the name of the book, but one of the books that we did a long time ago, that whole thing was staged. They had actually taken 2 bales of drugs, sat them outside the aircraft that they landed, took the picture and then put the shit back in and took off. The whole thing was staged. And that was used to do all of this. That was used to write the new directive. That was used to commit US military to fight fucking drug wars for the CIA. That was what the US military was being used for. Okay. Although the new US interagency presence brought the latest technique in the pursuit of targeted drug traffickers, it continued to play a key role with the Cali cartel. It is not disputed that in 1991, while working for the Cali cartel, AUC leader Carlos Castano, Castano, collaborated with the CIA and the Colombian police to bring down the fugitive drug baron Pablo Escobar. Carlos Castano and his brother were leaders of a death squad called Los Pepes that tracked down and killed members of Escobar's organization. They did so on the basis of information from the CIA, which was transmitted via special squads of the Colombian National Police trained by the same CIA. The U.S. Embassy had intelligence reports that in fact Los Pepes had been created by the Cali cartel, yet the Los Pepe killers fraternized with at least 2 DEA agents and gave one of them a gold watch. Escobar's ability to run his drug operations while nominally in prison ended only with his death. It seemed for a while that the traffic would be dominated by more accommodating Cali cartel, whose style was to work through the government rather than against them. But events changed in 1994 with the release of tapes of intercepted phone calls suggesting strongly that the Cali cartel had put $3.5 million into the electoral campaign of the actual winner of the political process, Ernesto Samper, Samper. The revelations allowed the U.S. government to take stern measures with the weakened Samper government, and by August 1995, the 3 major leaders of the Cali cartel had been arrested. Apparently, the Cali leaders, like Escobar before them, continued to oversee their drug trafficking from prison. According to the DEA, the drug trade in Colombia has become more decentralized with the breakup of the Cali cartel. A Colombian expert has a different perspective. He estimated that the DEA, and the DEA appears to agree, that with the effective dismantling of the 2 big cartels, an increasing share of the Colombian drug exports is now controlled by cartels in Mexico. Gosh, I wonder who controls them. According to the DEA, one of the principal suppliers in the Mexico cartel was Henao Montoya organization, which Carlos Castano is a partner in. Some in the United States may be unhappy at this Mexican shift. Twice in the last decades, Mexico has threatened to default on U.S. repayments to the U.S. banks. Crisis averted only by the issuance of emergency U.S. government loans. Drug profits contribute significantly to the foreign exchange earnings of Mexico, and they generate more than half of the foreign exchange earnings needed to repay the loans. So, gosh, I wonder who actually got paid off to move the drug cartels from Colombia to Mexico. Before the first loan was issued in 1982, the U.S. government had already ascertained from the DEA and the CIA that the profits from drug exports in Colombia and Mexico probably presented 75% of the source of incomes for the loans. Now, you see what's going on here. So we're going to strap, and this is the IMF, the World Bank, all of that. You go into these third world countries and you loan them all of this money, and then basically you install your government and your drug cartels to run this, that pays the interest on the debt that you gave to the government. And so that allows the government a part in protecting this whole drug operation. And then you just keep shifting it around from country to country like they've been doing since 1948, when they went into business with Chiang Kai-shek out of Taiwan. And you have the perpetual capturing. And oh, by the way, don't forget, Colombia is full of oil. So the whole time they're killing all of the civilians, they're destroying the government, and they're poisoning our country and everybody else with this drug operation. They're stealing all of the oil. That's why this book is called Drugs, Oil, and War. It's a concerted effort to do this. And oh, by the way, the IMF loans, they're actually made to the oil companies to build the infrastructure. You don't think they pay for that themselves. No, it's loaned to the country. And then the country, as a public works effort, commissions or gives a concession to Standard Oil or somebody to do all of the oil refineries. And there's not it's the same thing. There's not a penny out of their pocket. It's the same thing that we're finding with all of the shit that's being revealed today. Like George Soros supposedly was paying for all this shit. He didn't pay for anything. The whole USAID was giving shit to him to do all of this shit. This is just a repeat. It's a pattern. And that's why when it comes up today, if you don't know about all of this stuff in the past, it would be really hard to believe some of the things that is coming out. It's not hard at all for us because we know all of this. All right. To sum it up, the CIA can and does point to its role in the arrest and elimination of a number of Colombian traffickers. These arrests have not diminished the actual flow of cocaine into the United States, which is how you tell it's all bullshit. As a matter of fact, every time one of those arrests happened, the drug increase got more, or the drug inbound got more, just like what happened in Afghanistan and what happened with Chiang Kai-shek and all of the Vietnamese stuff. Why they have institutionalized the relationship of law enforcement to rival cartels and visibly contributed to the increase of the urban cartel violence while doing all of this. The true purpose of most of these campaigns, like the current Plan Colombia, current at the time in the 2000s, has not been the hopeless ideal of eradication. It has been to alter market share, to target specific enemies, and thus ensure the drug traffic remains under the control of the traffickers that the CIA controls. This confirms the judgment of Senate investigator Jack Bloom a decade ago, that America, instead of battling narcotics conspiracies, has become the conspiracy. And that is absolutely true. In Colombia, as in the Far East, the CIA proprietary and contract airlines have been accused of a more direct involvement in drug trafficking. The U.S. airline Southern Air Transport has been flying to Colombia and Venezuela since at least 1960, when it became, for a while, a CIA proprietary company. A series of reports have linked the airline to cocaine. In January 1987, during the first phase of the Iran-Contra revelations, newspapers reported that the Justice Department had recently suppressed a DEA investigation into Southern Air Transport's role in drug trafficking. Here's a quote. "The subpoenas, which are vigorously denied, are causing alarm. Officials in the federal DEA are revealing that they reported an arms for drugs air ferrying operation involving Southern Air Transport, the former CIA-owned airline, at the heart of the Iran Gate shipments, as long ago as last September, only to have their evidence discounted by the Justice Department." Unquote. The New York Times then reported that the accusations, quote, will be studied again, unquote, as part of the Iran-Contra investigation, more like buried. Predictably, they were not, yet allegations continued. And according to the CIA Inspector General, quote, a 1991 DEA cable to CIA reported that Southern Air Transport was of record in DEA's database from January 1985 to September 1990 for alleged involvement in cocaine trafficking. In other words, DEA knew unequivocally that it was a drug trafficking airline. An August 1990 entry in DEA's database reportedly alleged that $2 million was delivered to the firm's business sites, and several of the firm's pilots and executives were suspected of smuggling narcotic currency. They actually got caught doing that, by the way. This claim corroborates one made in 1986 by an FBI informant, Wanda Palicio, who was the wife of a Colombian trafficker. Palicio told investigators for the Kerry Senate Subcommittee investigation, Contra drug trafficking, that in 1983, she had seen Southern Air Transport planes in Colombia unloading guns and loading cocaine. Two subsequent events lent substance to her story. First, when a Southern Air Transport plane was shot down in Nicaragua, in 86, flight plans found in the wreckage showed that the pilot had flown on an Southern Air Transport plane to Colombia in 1985. Second, the U.S. government responded in an interesting way when Senator Kerry and his aide, Jonathan Weiner, took an 11-page proffer based on Palicio's statement to Justice Department official William Weld. Weiner later wrote in a memo describing the meeting, quote, Weld read about half a page and chuckled. I asked him why. He said, this isn't the first time today I've seen the allegation about CIA agents being involved in drugs. He stated several times in reading Wanda's statement that while he couldn't vouch for every line in it, there was nothing in it that didn't appear true to him or inconsistent with what he already knew, unquote. Yeah, like Cindy McCain saying that they knew exactly what Epstein was doing in New Mexico. They all know. The proffer was eventually referred by the DOJ to Richard Gregory in Miami, who was the attorney down there, who dismissed it, claiming that she was just wacky. At least one of the firms that was enmeshed with Southern Air Transport in controversial Contra support operations is doing contract work today for Plan Colombia. This is called EAST, EAST Inc. It stands for Eagle Aviation Services and Technology Incorporated. It was a subcontractor to DynCorp operations to spray coca plantations with herbicides. So instead of doing that and eradicating the drug supplies, they were actually ferrying the drug supplies back and forth. EAST was founded in 1982 by retired Air Force officer Richard Gadd, Gadd, who was pushed by Oliver North into Contra support operations despite a CIA's warning that his background would set off alarms. Accused by another ex-CIA operative of big profits in ripoff, Gadd, through his firm EAST, received $550,000 for covert Contra support work. In 1999 and 2000, EAST received more than $30 million under Defense Department contracts. This is in addition to its unknown share of DynCorp's 5-year, $170 million contract in Colombia for the State Department. Gadd received immunity for his Iran-Contra testimony and was never indicted. There were, however, a number of rumors linking drugs to the airstrip that East built for Oliver North's enterprise on Santa Elena Peninsula in Costa Rica. Jet Avra, which is spelled Avia, is another airline which is now out of business, suspected of both flying under contract for the CIA in Colombia and involvement in drug trafficking. Accordingly, federal law enforcement officials were aware that Jet Avia had been used by the CIA since the company's inception. In 1977, Jet Avia Lear landed in Colombia with a guy by the name of Jimmy Chagra, Chagra. He was a known Texan drug trafficker. The plane was owned by a guy by the name of Danny Ray Lassiter, who was a Las Vegas high roller who was soon to be under investigation for ties to organized crime and was eventually convicted of drug trafficking. Lassiter was not only a gambler and drug dealer, he was also alleged to have been a major cash contributor to Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton and Kentucky Governor John Brown Jr. Like the complex story of Afghan heroin and BCCI in Washington, so also the story of Colombian cocaine in Las Vegas, if further studied, would cast light on deep politics in the United States. And that, my friend, is how they launder money into political campaigns. And there's lots of laundered money into political campaigns. So we're going to stop there for today. We will start part 8 tomorrow.
Boy, it really is when you start hearing enough of these over and over and over again, it's rinse, wash, repeat. It's over and over and over. It really is a playbook, just like a football playbook that they pull out and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And they do it over and over because it works.
Well, what's interesting to me is with every book, there's some new element. For example, this guy goes a little bit further and actually shows the tie-in of the drug trafficker in the part that we've just read, and how that guy who is a drug trafficker in the United States, he's a known drug trafficker in Las Vegas, and they have tracked that laundered money into the political campaigns. Every book that we read either reconfirms what we've already, but I think knowing that more than one person, and I looked at the footnotes. His footnotes does use 2 other books that I have, but most of his footnotes are from other sources. And that to me is kind of what I look for. If people are just rinsing each other's material, then it becomes as suspect as something the CIA would do. But all of these books, for the most part, use whatever had been released at that particular time, which is generally what prompts them to read the books or write the books. And that's the fascinating thing to me. And that's why I really pay attention to the time these books are written. Like, if you look at a book that's written in the 1980s, it's generally spurred on by things like that came out of the Iran-Contra. And so it's not going to have any of the stuff like Paul Williams had a lot of stuff because he didn't write his book until 2015. He had even more relevant. And then you start going backwards and you start seeing the repetitive nature of it, as Bridget just pointed out. And it becomes fascinating to me that this story gets told over and over again with new updated information. And because no one highlights it, which is what we're trying to do, nothing ever gets done about it. People think every time something new comes out, and that's why I'm just getting totally frustrated with everybody on X. I'll get over it. Acting as if every piece of this JFK file that someone highlights is brand new information. None of it's new. We've been talking about this shit for the last 2 years plus. So anyway, anybody else?
But it does also remind me of, when you watch those artists that are painting a painting, and you don't really, at some point you start to get a grasp of what it is they're painting, and then as they get a little bit closer, it adds more context, and by the end of it, it looks like a living and breathing whatever.
Yes, that is true. That's why we keep going.
Right. Each time we uncover more aspects to this, it really puts that living, breathing.
Yes, I agree. That's why we're still here.
Right.
And still have our hair. Stellar, go ahead.
And I was going to add that every day, especially this past weekend, I'm seeing the playbook of the division, the instigators that I feel are actually operators, if that makes any sense, doing, like what you guys have talked about in these other countries when they're trying to cause their mischief. They're doing it here today. And I see that as clear as day, and how, they're trying to have people loop or focus on one thing without seeing the broader. And then they say it over and over and over again, thinking that the more that they say it, that it's going to hit in their brain more to get people to question what really is going on. So thank you for showing that. Oh my gosh, the Gladio glasses are on, plus the hearing too.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out, Stellar. It's exactly right. How are you, War Hamster?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm awesome.
Hey, I got something fun I wanted to, from one of your spaces from last week, I'd love to share.
Sure.
I forget which one of your listeners asked about Continental, the bank that crashed around 1980.
Probably Illini. He's from Illinois.
Yeah. Well, it ties into one of our earlier stories a little bit more. That I just wanted to add a little bit of flavor, if I may.
Sure.
So what they got in trouble with making a lot of risky loans, but what they were doing is they were borrowing money in the euro-dollar market. If people that have watched our BCCI series know about the euro-dollar.
Was that like the LIBOR scandal thing, or is this something different?
It's a little bit different. So, and this is Michael Sindona was real big in the euro-dollar lending. And that was basically the mafia banker.
He was the Vatican banker.
Yeah, well, he's mafia first, then the Vatican. That makes it even scarier that the Vatican thought the mafia banker was a good guy to get in business with. But the way it really went down is the euro-dollar, after the Bretton Woods Agreement in World War II, the euro-dollar, the city of London was really highly regulated. When it came to trading into pound sterling. But what happened is in the city of London, they were able to lend US dollars where there was no regulators. And the reason for that is City of London had special rules that English regulators didn't regulate US dollars, and the US regulators couldn't regulate anything in London because it was over international. So it became an absolute free-for-all of lending in the 80s. And that's where these guys, Continental, got in deep trouble. But it absolutely ties into Sindona and all of that. And at that point in time, almost half the world's banking, the whole world was going through that, the city of London because of the euro-dollar scheme. And that's where those guys got in trouble. Cool. The loans were all volatile because they were unregulated, and depositors started pulling their money. And that's where you got your bankruptcy.
So Continental at the end must have been probably on commercial paper, although they were FDIC, so they would have had the Fed window open to them. I still think it kind of goes back to Penn Square with the bankruptcy. At least that's
100% correct. Yeah, they were buying bad loans from Penn Square, a lot of the oil exploration loans, and so yeah, it definitely goes back to Penn Square. But I like the fact that it ties into our favorite characters. BCCI.
Fair point. Yeah, there's. I envision it as two separate scandals. It does appear that there is. I mean, Warhamster. It seems like you pointed out an interesting connection in terms of the public one and Continental's bankruptcy. But the Vatican Bank connections and I think David Kennedy, the chairman, who's no relation to Joe and JFK. That financial connection is interesting too, and if I can just find that lawsuit from the 70s on alleging these intelligence connections, that would be a really fascinating read.
Shoot me a DM with some more details on that, and I'll see if I've got anything in my notes.
Okay, we'll do it. It's going to be a lot of digging to find this one.
No rush.
Yeah, that's all we need is Illini and Warhamster together. That would be rock star dangerous right there.
It would be awesome.
Yes, it would. And if nothing else, that's what this forum does, is it allows people, like today, I'd never heard, somebody maybe in here that knows, somebody sent me a link to the podcast that I'd never heard of that guy. But he talks about all the same stuff that I forwarded out a little while ago. And again, this is you guys. This is all you guys. You are putting all of these pieces together. I feel like I'm the orchestra conductor because you guys are so smart and you're all over the internet looking at all kinds of information. And I think the more people that this forum could connect to, it becomes overwhelming once we all get on the same sheet of music. And quite frankly, that's what they're afraid of. That's exactly what Stellar was just talking about. The ability of all of us to join hands is their worst nightmare. And that's exactly what keeps me motivated, because some days are really, really tough. Trust me. So yeah, it's all good. Renee, go ahead.
Hey there, Colonel. Let me know if there's too much background noise because I'm driving right now.
No, you're good.
Okay, cool. Well, today was a big day. I got my rice bowl just peed in. I have a family member that worked for Southern Air and Miami Air. Yeah, I'm gonna try and I guess ask some questions. And they were in the Marines and had a medical discharge, and then did some contract. They were a flight engineer. He was a flight engineer, and after military discharge, he was hurt, but he did work for some subcontractors and airlines. I do know about Southern and Miami. I'll try and get maybe some fish around and get some details or information and report back. But yeah, today was my pea in the rice bowl day, I guess.
So, and this is a good point that I don't think a lot of people can appreciate. The reason why, and thank you for reminding me of this, because flight engineers, most aircraft, like airliners, the passenger airliners don't have flight engineers on them anymore. The flight engineer basically kind of serves in the old like crew chief role / navigator role. They're like the jack of all trades. So you have the right and left seat pilots. And on cargo aircraft, during the time that I worked at Evergreen, which was another one of those contract carriers for the CIA, they all had flight engineers on them. And again, most military have flight engineers on them. So that was a common thing for me to see. But now, when I first started doing this research, one of the things that struck me as very interesting is the role of the flight engineer. Because if you are trafficking drugs or any of that other stuff, they're not making the same amount of money that the pilots are. They're not like making bank. But every one of these flights had a flight engineer. Where are all of those people? Because they damn sure knew what was going on in the cargo area, because that was their freaking job, is to make sure all of the stuff's buttoned down, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't mean, I mean, if you've ever seen the inside of the cargo hold on like a UPS, FedEx, or their contract carriers like Evergreen, this stuff is in these big containers. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to see stuff, but as I told you, when I walked onto that aircraft for Evergreen, and I see all of these certificates of where this airline, this one particular plane, the very first one I was on, but they were all like that. It was just the first one I ever saw, which was just shocking to me, is all of the different certifications that they had in different countries to fly into them commercially. And so the flight engineer is going to be the one responsible for keeping all of that stuff updated. So they're going to know. And do you not think that if you're prior military and you're flying into every single drug hot zone in the world, that you're not going to go, shit, what are we carrying here? Sure they are. So I would love, Renee, to hear any feedback that you get from that, because that's exactly the kind of person, because they didn't get rich off of this stuff, not like some of the pilots did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, today, it's funny because when I think back to Timeline, it was probably in the late 80s he worked for them. But yeah, today he really doesn't have anything to show of it. So obviously he wasn't making bank.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I
will report back.
Okay.
Hopefully I get some juicy bits.
Okay. Yeah. Even if you just ask them, hey, where all did you fly to? Because I'll be willing to bet we could draw a dotted line to all of the different operations. Thanks for.
You got it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Pleasure. Will do.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Sure. Miles, go ahead.
Oh, hi, Colonel. How you doing?
Good.
Good. Yeah, just because what you were just saying, in your travels, did you meet anybody from the 133rd Air Wing?
133rd. Where's that one from?
They're the cargo. They're stationed out in Minneapolis.
I've been to that base. I don't know anybody that flew with them.
Oh, okay. I'm just real close to them. They fly over my house all the time, going to Duluth.
Yeah.
There's another base there. But my question is, I'm doing some research on Tiananmen Square, and now that I've got my Gladio glasses on, I'm looking at that protest completely different than what we've been told.
Right.
Because I was watching it real time. We had a satellite dish at the Chinese restaurant that I was working at. I was a bartender. So we were like tapping into Vancouver, going through the BBC. We weren't listening to American propaganda, but I mean, the BBC was still propaganda.
I was going to say, that's just a different version of it.
But what I'm starting to find out is that George Soros was involved in that protest.
Yes, the entire thing was set up. It was a Gladio operation.
Yeah, okay, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So I just want to get some more information. Now, did you have some source material that I could read?
I have, but I do not know which book it was in. I'd have to go out there and look. But there was an entire, if you just go to Yandex and you search on Tiananmen Square and paramilitary CIA, it will turn up a whole bunch of articles.
Well, the interesting fact is that, do you know what country banned George Soros first? Besides
Hungary?
It was China.
Yeah, he's definitely banned in China.
Yeah, that they knew, they were ahead of the curve. They knew what he was up to.
Yeah.
So I think it was interesting that they banned him right after Tiananmen Square.
Yeah. Should have told us a whole bunch of stuff, huh?
Colonel, can I add something?
Sure.
To that?
Sure.
Matt Arrett, who I know you know,
Mm-hmm.
has done a number of videos on Tiananmen Square, and he draws the same connections. If you'd like, I can send you a couple links to the videos. But he's the one that turned me on to that alternative theory of Tiananmen Square about 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. And Cynthia, his wife, is very well versed. I mean, obviously, she wrote the origins of Operation Gladio in her book, The Empire in Which the Black Sun Never Sets. She's very up on that as well.
Yeah, they're both a good source on the topic. Again, when I first time I heard it, I was a bit skeptical, and as I've done more reading, it turns out they're probably onto something. So I'm on board with that theory.
Yeah. All right. Who else has got something? JC, did you come up to ask a question?
Yes, Colonel Count. Isn't Soros also banned in Russia?
I can't understand you.
He asked if Soros was also banned in Russia.
Thank you.
Oh, I don't know. I assume anybody that goes into Russia has a very strict admission. As a matter of fact, it took Tucker quite a bit to get into Russia. So I don't imagine Soros would ever be allowed in Russia. I don't know if there's an official ban, but I don't see him ever getting a visa to go to Russia ever. Miles?
Yeah, I'll just bring this up real quick because it happened yesterday. I opened up a space actually during the space that I think a lot of people kind of outed themselves as chaos agents or social engineers. You know, Simon was in there and Truth Teller, and they were just talking over everybody. And Santino was not running the space properly. And I saw you in there, Colonel. I mean, these people, like, I've been watching them for a while. So I wanted, like I said, I opened up a space and we were just talking about, you know, what was actually happening in that space because, you know, we know that they're the way that they handle the situation when you're trying to, they'll talk over you and they won't give you a chance to, you know, get your point across. They will not debate with you. So I was glad that I was in there to see that, and I know you were too. But you left, and you know, I know why you probably left.
No, I don't think you do. I was there Saturday and actually spoke, and the people that were there were, when I spoke, for the most part, they were very courteous. As a matter of fact, Simon referenced the things that I talked about repeatedly. And it was a very interesting conversation, but no one was talking over, but there was a different co-host at the time. And he kept things fairly well wrapped up. When I saw yesterday that Alpha was in there, I went in, but only while I was getting ready to go to my sister's birthday party. I was not in a place where I could actually talk. And when that guy, Truth Teller, did his dumbass bullshit, I was actually walking into my sister's house for her birthday party, so I wasn't able to stay on and request a mic. That's why I left. Because I would not have left had it not been for my sister and her party. I would have said what I said in that post this morning. I would have said in front of all of them because it becomes very obvious to me when, and again, we're all kind of learning this stuff together. Most of that, and this is kind of funny because for me anyway, I know a lot of the textbook stuff on how psychological operations works because you learn that in your professional military education. And, you know, I read a lot of stuff about that kind of thing. But when you're actually watching it unfold, it is very different. That you don't lose the intuition based on the education that you have. And I'm going to give you guys a couple of examples. during the course of me getting to know Brian Cates, Brian Cates is a big target because he has a big audience. And there are people, especially because he's deaf, when he's in groups, there's certain dynamics that he misses. And at certain points, he was offered to go and be involved in different things, one of which was the pit. And I explained to him unequivocally what was going to happen there. And I was very detailed on what I said was going to happen. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. And they did the follow on to that and pretended like they were going to do some movie with a scaled down version of that, of which Brian was included again. And that was down in Miami. And I almost literally begged him not to go because I knew, and they had to pay for all of this. And Brian lives off of the contributions of people give him for his work. He does not have another income. And these were not cheap ventures. And so in hindsight, I mean, obviously, but it's stuff that you pick up just because of the formal education. But as you're involved in this, like for example, with the whole Mike Benz, it took, I knew when he reached out and then unfollowed me, something was really weird going on. But it took Alpha reaching out to me to share with me the other 3 people whose information he had taken on the whole. I mean, there's that one girl, her name's like Kirsten or something. She's the one that discovered all of that censorship he claims is his. It wasn't his. So there were like 3 other people that he had basically done the same thing to. And then, of course, he blocks them because he doesn't want them coming into his communications and letting people know about that. But again, anytime, and what he did, which is very instructive for anybody, and this is not a Mike Benz bashing. I'm not bashing him. I'm telling you facts. When he infiltrated the Proud Boys on behalf of a quote unquote Jewish project, if you guys, and I did, if you guys go back and you watch the videos of him, and they're online, which is just the most bizarre thing, he does exactly what Truth Teller was doing in that space yesterday, in bashing the Jewish religion and Jews in general, and all of that stuff. He does that online as this persona frame game in order to entice other people so they can identify other people that are friendly to that line of thinking. So if I want to attract people that are fanatically anti-Semite, you do that by acting like an anti-Semite so that they feel comfortable around you in exposing that anti-Semitism. It is a very well-known tactic. You are not going to find, and the intelligence agencies use this all the time. And I'm not making any implications here. I'm telling you that in a propaganda campaign, when we do PSYOPs, we learned about this at Air War College. You don't find out people by trying to be the anti part of it. You find out people by blending into those people. And so it's almost like literally a red herring. Anytime I see somebody that is so over the top in any one direction, the hair on the back of my neck stands up, because it seems to me that that's exactly what you would do to send into those spaces to disrupt them and keep people from coalescing around the truth. And as long as people facilitate that, and it's not that you can't let somebody who has something that is about specifically about Mossad or specifically about the IDS or specifically something about the Israeli government, that you cannot add that to a space and absolutely not be an anti-Semite or whatever. You can. We do it every day on here, just like we did today. Israel was involved in Colombia. They had a political advisor to the president that was the one arranging these 1-year fellowships over to the IDF to learn how to be a terrorist. Those are unequivocally true facts. And I mean, for the most part, you can even find them in Wikipedia. That's how well known those facts are. But when you go over the top and then cross the red line of saying what he said to Alpha, he did exactly that. He just outed himself in a big way. And to hold anybody in our military responsible for what our government did in the lies in which they told on behalf of this international syndicate is one of the most disgraceful things that you could ever do. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, just an FYI. I'm Occupy Wall Street, as I've said many times in here. And I got into Russia and protested in Russia. And there were Occupy people. They didn't call themselves Wall Street, but Occupy was global. And we went, to hang out with them. So the idea that, it's the Soviet Union and it has an Iron Curtain, that's a myth now, I think. My experience.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but they're still not letting Soros in.
No, of course. I just didn't want people to think that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Stellar, go ahead.
Hey, first of all, I wanted to apologize for that day. When they were talking in there, I had no idea what kind of a room it was and had no idea and, wanted to, talk to them about Operation Gladio. They had me up there for a long time. And it seemed like every time I tried to expand out from it, it was like blocked and blocked and blocked. And it got to the point where, it was not, they were respectful, except the other co-host, not Santino. When he started going through your wall and he was talking smack about the people that you just reposted, and in my opinion, he disrespected you and every veteran or anyone who has served and made an oath to our Constitution that believed in our Constitution and that their higher ups were also.
Well, but that's what I said to him. You're going to go through my post and not actually read my threads, just who I repost. There's no religion filter that I use for repost, and you doing that is disingenuous, and that's basically what I said to him. But what's funny about that is he DM'd me and asked me to go into and actually have a space with him on explaining Operation Gladio because he didn't know what the hell it was. That was the funny part of the whole thing. Now, of course, I won't do that now that they've all showed their ass, but I do think it was hilarious that someone would use a filter of, and he used the example of Laura Loomer, and I'm like, she's a good reporter. She's reported on, who else would have known about Hunter Biden in South Africa if it hadn't have been for her? You have no filter to the truth. And if you do, you're never going to know the fucking truth. So you can take your filters and shove them. Miles, go ahead.
They really do need to be educated, at least the co-host. And there were a lot of listeners that listened. And even like when Alpha was in there the next day, and those people, that truth guy, even Simon, I think Simon got really super vile and so did that truth teller. And that's where I was like, holy.
Yeah, I didn't see that on Simon's part. I'm not disagreeing with you, but here's the funny thing about it, Stellar. Saturday when I was in there, our followership went up by like 1,000 just for me going in there and explaining to them what I did. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. I will go in and tell anybody about Operation Gladio, and there's no one that, in my opinion, that knows that story better than I do. And that's on here that, goes in spaces and stuff. Cause obviously there's a lot of people that knows it better than I do, like Daniel Ganser and Paul Williams, but they're not here. So it's me, and I got a big mouth. So I will do that. And don't ever not send me the invitations to go in there, because I'll go, because it inevitably increases our viewership every single time I do it, because people are looking for people that can talk facts and present them regardless of the assholes that are also in the space that want to talk over them because they don't want the facts known. And then that shows their ass, and it also gets us more audience, which is all good. It's a win-win as far as I'm concerned. Miles, go ahead.
Yeah, these limited hangouts on this platform like JQ Radio, now, I'm not going to participate, but I'm going to observe what's going on. Now, I've been following Ghost Based of Patrick Henry since he kind of started, when he was pretty green, getting in front of the camera. And I'm really, like Gordon, does a great job explaining what's going on. They would not even let him speak in that space because of the information that he gathers about the Middle East. You're familiar with Gordon, right?
I've been on his show. Yeah, I'm very familiar with him.
Yeah, I think he's young and he's dedicated, and I think he does a great job.
They wouldn't let him on what show?
Oh, that space yesterday. They wouldn't let him talk about some of the stuff that he's researched about Trump and who he really supports.
Did he try to get on the show?
No. I'm just saying that that's a good example of somebody that could counter what they're talking about in their little limited hangouts, about the Jews, that, he could actually give them some good information and data that would counteract what they're talking about, because I think part of their operation
they're trying to get people to turn away from Trump. They are trying to break us away from Trump, because they literally called him out and said all kinds of really bad things. It's like when General Flynn, that was like the red line in the sand. And it's the same with this thing right now. And they're trying to say, you need to keep questioning and undermining and all this other stuff. And it's like, the man's only been in for 2 months. Give me a break. We were getting the people in. We have to do this law and order. And it's the same Gladio tactics that they've done, color revolutions, or whatever the hell you want to call it.
Coups, Stellar, coups. Illini, go ahead.
I'm saying that because that's what they call them, the color revolutions.
I know.
And they've been doing this over and over. And yes, they would definitely go with the cartel people or the mafia people in Italy, because one of the first stories that you talked about when we first were learning about Operation Gladio was how the stay-behinds were and the Vatican Bank were using the mafia people or whatever for the movement of like these little structured upheavals. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm a little fired up. I apologize.
That's fine. Go ahead, Illini.
Hey, Colonel. Two things. First off, Carrie and I are slowly going through the JFK files and the Rockefeller releases that happened. We did find, apparently, I think, the master index of all of their files. The index, not the actual content of the files, is 250 pages long. So there's a lot. So you were wise to stay away from this project, Colonel.
Yeah.
I think we're going to slowly digest it. Like, I'm going to slowly digest it. If Carrie starts running ahead, maybe I'll try to catch up with her. But, you know, we could always use, you know, some more looking at it. We at least have the hyperlink for that, and we kind of know, you know, where in the index file to start looking. Obviously, we're going to have to do more work to actually find, you know, these files in all of the JFK file releases. So kudos to Carrie on this. The second thing is I also posted to the Nest, now that everybody's talking about JFK, the story of Abraham Bolden, who was a Secret Service agent in Chicago.
Yes.
Bolden was, you know, he spoke with Mark Lane as he was writing Rush to Judgment, I think, which came out in like '66. And he, more importantly, he spoke with the Secret Service Inspector General Thomas Kelly, and raised, you know, his two concerns. First, that, you know, some of the people on the White House detail were drinking on the job, and second, that he also claims that he raised the assassination attempt. But you know, Thomas Kelly corroborated that aspect of it, that he did actually investigate allegations of drinking by the agents in his, you know, 1970 interview. After Abraham Bolden did that, he claims that he was set up by his boss, Martineau, you know, on this bribery charge. And you have the witness in open court, you know, in his own trial, claiming that the prosecutor suborned perjury from him. That's all in the transcript. They have actually what they claim is a document with, you know, the prosecutor's handwriting on it, you know, as evidence of the prosecutor asking him to lie under oath. And then finally, they've got it. I think there's a newspaper article alleging that Sykes, you know, the prosecutor pled the fifth,
right,
when asked,
right,
you know, if he had suborned perjury,
right. And who does that?
It's. I mean, you take a look at this, and if anybody's seen institutional retaliation before, you look at an instance like this,
and you see it everywhere.
Holy cow, this is credible. And the powers that be have basically surrendered all their credibility on this. I think, and
they threw him in jail.
They threw him in. They prosecuted him. There was a mistrial during his first trial. The second trial, they finally got him. They sent him to prison for 6 years. He winds up in Leavenworth. They sent him to the psych ward, even though they don't really have any cause for that. He gets out. The House Committee on Assassinations interviews him in '78. They say he seems normal and everything, and he seems, you know, very reasonable. He seems happy with his new job, you know, as a manager at another firm. And Bolden finally gets a pardon from the Biden administration in 2022. So I think it supports the narrative of institutional betrayal.
Yes, 100%.
Somewhere on the line, Bolden was saying something that they didn't, that they were afraid of getting at.
That was inconvenient. Yeah.
That was highly inconvenient, and that they needed a prosecutor for it. And so I pinned this book to the Nest. I've also pinned a 1965 article, newspaper article to the Nest too, just in case people have, you know, questions about the veracity of all of this. Harold Weissman saved a lot of newspaper clippings, you know, from the 1960s on both in the Tribune, the Sun-Times, and the Chicago Daily News. And people can investigate it for themselves. It seems like back in the 60s, the press was actually on Abraham Bolden's side, which is kind of surprising.
And, well, kind of. He was the first Black Secret Service agent ever. So he already had his challenges doing his job. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the whole story, the allegation was Dallas was like the third or fourth stop that they were planning an assassination. They had already decided they were going to assassinate Kennedy. There are revelations that it was originally planned for the Miami stop, and then there was a revelation that it couldn't happen there. It was going to be done in Chicago, and those two may be out of order, but whatever, because he was making a lot of appearances. And so the whole reason that the Chicago Secret Service thing even became a thing is because that there were preparations being made for an assassination attempt in Chicago. And then it obviously happens in Dallas. And so this was a very elaborate thing that was going on. There was no way JFK was going to be allowed to, and again, if you have your Gladio glasses on, this is exactly what they did to Charles de Gaulle at the same time. They did at least 20 assassination attempts on de Gaulle. So this is not far-fetched. It's not something that's out of the realm. And that's why these people that have a fixated focal on this is the only people that were involved in the assassination of JFK, they miss all of the big dynamics going on. JFK talked frequently with Charles de Gaulle, and they were on the same sheet of music on many different foreign policy issues. One of the most contentious was the freedom in Algeria. And de Gaulle was giving Algeria the freedom. And the OAS assassins that were trying to assassinate de Gaulle at the time, that at least two of them were in Dallas the day JFK was assassinated, all have a place in this story, but anybody who has blinders on are not going to see the entire story. And we're here to make sure they see the entire story. Miles, go ahead.
Well, Colonel, I just want to kind of do a flashback. So before we met, and I don't know what you were doing like in the summer of 21, but we were trying to navigate what we just experienced with the election, and then J6, and then, the takeover, because we didn't really know what was going on, trying to figure it out on Spaces. So we're looking we had an expression, cracks in the armor. We were trying to find little cracks in the armor that we could, get a win here and there. And I just want to tell everybody now that, we had to go through that period, and we had to, it was a learning experience. And I mean, there's cracks all over the place, and we've got wins every day. So I just want to get a little prep rally for you guys that, things are definitely on our side now, and we're winning big time. So it's going to be fun to see the takedown. I think Cash has said he's got some stuff coming up for us.
Yeah. Stellar, go ahead.
I'm just very thankful that that you introduced me to this Gladio stuff, because I feel that with the Gladio glasses, it helps to guide me to see what the truth is. And with truth, there comes, knowledge, and knowledge is our power. So I just want to say thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I owe a huge big thanks to everybody here, and especially you guys that show up every day. You guys have done a tremendous amount in spreading this information. I could not be more proud of everybody in here. The going in and oh, by the way, just so that you guys know, a lot of times, like when I'm sitting here playing with my grandson, I do go into spaces anonymously, especially ones that I see you guys are in. And I do hear you talking. If I go in not actually without anonymous, there's a tendency of people wanting me to come up and talk when I can't talk, obviously, because He's getting quite vocal, actually. And so that would be very awkward. So I just want to let you guys know that I do hear you talking about this stuff in spaces. And it's an awesome feeling. Definitely gives me the fortitude to keep going. It's like food for me as far as an energy source. So I really, really appreciate it. I know that this is a lot of time out of everybody's day to spend here learning together. So although I do have to call out, what is this OK Cyber Geek over here? Said that was a collection of window lickers there yesterday. That made my day. Go ahead, Stellar.
Well, because, my journey was waking up from, the banking and seeing the corruption and following that part of the money, maybe not as intricate as War Hamster, but then realizing that that's just another layer that is Operation Gladio, is that control system. And then now seeing what's going on with the decentralization, yes, no central banking and, stable coins, at least here in the United States. It looks like there's a lot of things happening where, we as Americans can invest within our own country, and the resources and things like that, getting involved with, unfortunately we have politics, but getting involved locally, getting involved nationally as much as I can, and stuff. I just, the introduction to War Hamster, which is unbelievable. And there's so many others that you've brought onto the stage or interviewed with. The voice Alpha has, as far as truth, I don't know where he gets his compassion or his patience and stuff from. It must be something that you guys are trained in the military, because I would just go batshit crazy, to be honest with you. But in any case, thank you so much.
Well, I mean, it's a recognition of what's actually going on, and that's let me share something else with you guys. Because I'm glad you brought that up, Stellar. It is something that you're taught to do in the military. The worst thing you can do in any forum in the military is to be emotional. You can't. It is off the table when you walk in the door. That doesn't mean you don't have compassion or empathy for people, but you cannot lead an organization of thousands of people if you display emotion. You can't. You have to be objective. It doesn't mean that you don't get mad, but you never, and that's true about the thing about never letting them see you sweat. You never, ever do it. I'm going to tell you my first lesson in that. I was 18 years old, and I walked out of an office after the NCO that I worked for, when I had just got to my first duty assignment, was screaming at me for something. And he was totally emotional over something that I had nothing to do with. He had none of the facts correct. And when I walked out of the office, I slammed the door. And oh my God, that sent him over the top. Never, ever from that day for the next 30 years did I ever show a single ounce of emotion at work, ever. And when I was a colonel, I was in a job that was a wing commander. We had thousands of people working there. And I had another colonel come to see me who I knew was an asshole. And I knew what he was trying to do, which was contrary to what the mission of my organization was. There was a group of people, it was a brand new unit. There was a group of people that didn't want the unit created. And they thwarted every thing that my boss was trying to do with this unit. And he had been selected his name had come out on the most recent promotion list to brigadier general. And so that means he's still a colonel until he pins on. So he came to my office, and I knew what the whole thing was about because I had gotten some intel about what he wanted to talk about. And so I made sure the way that we were sitting, because he had to come to my office, that I was sitting behind my desk. Now, normally you would have, for a fellow colonel, sat in the chairs or in the couch and the coffee table, because it's a big, sweet office, somewhere in a more relaxed setting. But I didn't do that. And so I made him sit on the other side of the desk like he was reporting to me. And you could tell what was happening the more he talked. And I basically told him that that was not my agenda. I wasn't going to do any of those things. And I was very respectful. And he said something to the effect, "That's not how you talk to a general officer." And I looked at him and I looked at the rank on his shoulder. I said, "You're a fucking colonel. And until you pin on, you will be a fucking colonel." I said, "And as far as I'm concerned, you can get your ass out of my office right now." So as soon as I threw him out of the office, he drove to my boss, who was a 2-star general's office. It took about 10 minutes for him to get there. I called the secretary, who was a very, very good. Y'all always suck up to the secretaries. I used to take her shit all the time. So I called her and I said, "I need to talk to the general." And I told her, I said, "And it's an emergency." So I told him exactly what this guy did. And the general wanted my organization, as it was constituted, to succeed. And so when that guy got over to the general's office to basically tattletale on me, the general basically said exactly what I said to him and kicked him out of his. And not only did he kick him out of his office, he told him he was never allowed, because the guy was actually stationed at Wright-Patt Air Force Base in Ohio, and we were in Georgia. He said, "You can go back there and don't ever come to this base again. I don't want you here ever." And so those types of situations where you don't allow them, you don't let them intimidate you. So I say all of that for this reason. You guys noticed that one of the people that came into the conversation this morning with the whole alpha thing, they use things like, "I was a abused child," or "I'm a victim of some kind." As far as I'm concerned, I mean, while I have all the sympathy in the world for child abusers, I don't know you from Adam. And if you're going to come into a thread that has absolutely nothing to do with that, and first of all, establish your bona fides as a victim and then use them to critique me, fuck you. That's what I've got to say about you. You don't come into threads that I'm in, that I'm having a conversation with about, and then try to manipulate the conversation by saying that you're such and such a victim. And the one guy a long time ago, I don't even remember, he was Gray, somebody that had the butterfly shit all over, that tried to come into the conversation about, "Oh yeah, I was over in Afghanistan and I know all about Gladio and this and that." And then come to find out it was to derail everything, and then started saying about how he was part of the MK Ultra stuff and all this other stuff, and tried to get me to talk about MK Ultra. I'm not talking about MK Ultra. I'm not an expert in it. When I see that it's related to a Gladio operation, I will call it out. I'm not talking about it. They do that specifically to try to get you off target, and it's not going to work. So I just want you guys to know, it's not because I don't have sympathy or empathy for these people. I'm just not going to play their games. And I see them as game playing. Sunshine, go ahead.
Colonel, while we're waiting, can I interject a couple things?
Well, hold on. Sunshine, are you talking?
I'm sorry, I had a phone call. No, my grandson just called me. He's on his way down here to Florida. He wants to know what he could bring.
Okay.
Anyhow, I just wanted to say, listening to you say that you listen in on, these spaces anonymously just tickles me, because I don't know how many times if I can get a mic where, I'm like, call it what it is, name it, put a name to it. It's Operation Gladio. I'm just so glad to hear that you hear everybody out there,
Not everybody, but I definitely listen. So, yep.
Great. Love it.
All right. Go ahead, Warhamster.
Well, first of all, I agree about Ghost of Base Patrick Henry. He's fantastic. Gordon is a personal friend. And if I may pat myself on the back, he made his very first video on my channel. I had him on to tell a story about it, his brother and all that. So I've known him a long time. I'm incredibly pleased at how well he's done. He's a great researcher and a good guy. Second thing I was going to tell you is I could find nothing on whether George Soros himself has ever been banned from Russia. But I had this in my notes that there are open society foundations and almost every other NGO in the world was banned from Russia.
Yep.
But it was in 2012, which is very interesting because that's right there after the Arab Spring, and that's right when the Russian reset ended. And we've seen that same pattern, like in Georgia, which we talked about.
Right.
They're trying to get rid of NGOs and get their own FARA laws. So apparently that's something that really sets off our intelligence agencies. They like their NGOs operating.
Correct. Yeah.
But no, I didn't see anything, and I've been searching for like 20 minutes that George Soros himself has ever been banned.
Yeah. Well, being banned and not being allowed in is two different things. They are not going to issue him a visa. It's not going to happen.
Maybe they're smart.
Yeah. Omega.
Thank you, Colonel. Can I ask you a question? I ask Miles all the time, but we're not real sure. Is Igloo White a part of Gladio?
Is what?
Operation Igloo White.
Igloo White. Why does that ring a bell?
Vietnam, when they started doing the transmitters to listen to everybody talking and could tell what was coming.
Well, Vietnam in and of itself, if you look at the Phoenix program, you look at the false flags, you look at the way they set all of that up, and it was all being done on basically to covertly protect the opium production in Laos and the Golden Triangle. So there are all of the components of Gladio was used in Vietnam. And they even created stay behind units in the north. Any particular facet of it is going to be, part and parcel of the entire operation. What's most important to me about labeling something as part of Gladio versus not part of Gladio, if it goes to the destabilization of a country in order to generate a couple of different things, like the trafficking of weapons, the trafficking of people, and the trafficking of drugs, then that's part of Gladio. And Vietnam hits every single one of those. Not only were they trafficking people out of Vietnam into all sorts of places, they had baby lifts of the quote unquote orphans into the United States, most of which were never accounted for. Obviously, the destabilization piece of it, when they were doing psychological operations in the north to force migrate 1 million people down to the south to destabilize it, and then they use those people as rats to rat on their neighbors in the aftermath when they were trying to destabilize the South, and so that they could quote unquote have a fake president DM installed there because, of all these Catholic people, because the 1 million that they moved was Catholic. So they wanted to disproportionately represent Catholicism in the South in order to justify putting their stooge DM in the presidency. And so every aspect, to include the Phoenix program, was part of a Gladio operation. Does that help?
Yeah, I was. I met it. And Miles will tell you this. I met a CIA officer that was in Laos, and that's where they ran Igloo White out of. And I didn't know if Gladio had started before that, and you know what I mean. It was all bundled into the same thing, and I always wanted to ask you. So thank you.
So Gladio goes back to, I mean, as the program that we talk about post World War II, the actual concept of stay behind units goes back to at least the late 1800s as a tactic. Some would argue it goes back even further, but that's kind of the origins that's the point I like to start with the Boer Wars in Southern Africa, and then kind of just bring that concept forward when I'm doing like a 101 on what Gladio is. But the actual Gladio itself, and not just the stay behind portion of it, started post World War II when they created all of the government intelligence agencies as a standing entity, where before that, they basically that had not necessarily been a formal agency within the government. It had been embedded in the military anytime there was a military operation. So yeah. Yeah.
Igloo White was absolutely military in origin, but as you said, everything there was, they were working together. So they're absolutely interconnected, but it was always it was initiated from the military in McNamara. But I 100% agree that they were working together.
So, yeah, okay. I'm looking at my notes. Yeah, okay. So, that's why I remember it. If you look at, they actually flew. God, how could I even not remember that? This is basically what we would call like an AVSOC, which is basically what they are now at Hurlburt Field. This is the precursor, and they were flying out of the Philippines and out of where? Formosa. And they were basically doing the reconnaissance flights for all of the special operations, as you just said, that was going on in Laos, which was 100% a CIA operation. Unfortunately, there was an entire group of Air Force officers, though, that were checked in at Udon, Thailand, changed in civilian clothes, and then ferried up to Laos in order to fly those missions as well. And if they were ever caught, they had no U.S. military identification at all. And we did lose a few of them, and they were assumed to be CIA contractors, when in fact there were at least a handful of them that were actually on active duty military flying those missions.
I know that there was a general that had got arrested because he wanted to know how they knew the information that they knew. At least that's what the story I was told by the man that I met.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the recon planes that flew out of the Philippines and Taiwan into Vietnam, Laos, and yeah. I knew I recognized the name. I just had to look in my notes. Thank you. Miles, go ahead.
Yeah, I rarely take a microphone in a punch bowl, but I did this morning, kind of to stir the pot, talking about the Commonwealth, that, Trump was asked to join the Commonwealth. Boy, that kind of stirred the pot on the discussion. And I'm not saying that I really know what's going on with that. I did do some research on what that is. It's, 56 countries. And, and Trump was asked by the Queen to join the Commonwealth. And now I think it's going to happen again when he meets with the King. But what I wanted to bring up is that out of nowhere, someone showed up and was talking about a personal issue. And I'll have to give Margot kudos because she stood up for our vets. His issue, and I'll try to be brief on this, when he was 5 years old, his mother was killed. His father said that she died in a car accident. That was not the case. It was a veteran that turned into a serial killer and killed his mom. And he's been on this journey ever since to make sure that he gets exhumed and that he's not buried in a military grave site. And he's gone so far to have Ted Cruz sponsor a bill about this. And Margot stepped in and said, well, listen, there's been a lot of military vets that have done horrible things. But when they sign up, that's one of the things that they're guaranteed is a burial. So she did stand up for the vets. And I don't think he really understood what Margot was saying. I don't know what you think about that, Colonel, but I'm not seeing that this bill is going to go anywhere.
I don't know anything about it, and I don't want to comment on it until I have a chance to look at it. I don't know what you're talking about. So, okay. Anybody else? Nope. We're good. All right. We will be back here tomorrow, same time. Stella, are we going doing the pond tonight?
You know, I haven't talked to him very much in the last several weeks.
I think he's been busy.
Busy.
Yeah.
So I don't think so.
Okay.
If you guys want me to open up something, I will. If you want to talk about something, and he's told me that I can open up the pond under and host it, but it's up to you guys. You
so
let me know.
What I want to do is I want to over on Rumble go over. I was just looking for his post. There's because I want to give him a shout out. Where are they? So much stuff going on today. Hold on. Let me just scroll down through here. There's someone who had uploaded all of the JFK using an OCR, which is the font that most of the old messages and cables are in, reader to get the best clarity on the releases. And he was kind of doing searches for stuff based on some keywords that he had DM'd me about, and I had suggested, and then he was posting some of them. Well, one of the things he posted is a multi-page, I mean, it's long. Obviously, I doubt that we'll get to the whole thing. But I did want to do like a desktop look through this document, because the document is actually amazing if you're a group of people with your Gladio glasses on. So maybe at 8 o'clock, Paul X, his handle is at I am Mystery Man 2. So I'm Mystery Man 2. And definitely give him a follow. He's doing an awful lot of research and tagging me on stuff that he finds in the JFK as it relates to stuff that we've been talking about. So I've got that open, and I do want to do that. Number one, I want to try the Rumble Studio.
Do that, yeah, and then do something that's like the live so that we can read it all on the simulcast.
Yes. And that's why it will be on Rumble. I'll feed it over to X, but I'm actually going to do the video on the Rumble Studio. Number one, because I want to figure out how to make that work and use the Rumble Studio for doing that, so I don't have to go through StreamYard. They have made some updates to the Rumble Studio, and I do want to get better at using that. So this is going to allow us to learn together. And so let's plan on doing that at 8 o'clock. All right. I will see you guys.
That would be perfect. Yeah, okay. That's perfect.
Awesome. All right.
And then have co-host, that way she can message you with whatever questions we have on this side, because some of us are techie stupid for Rumble.
Well, but if you don't watch it on Rumble, you're not going to see the video, are you?
When you simulcast it live on there and you show the screen, we can see everything on your screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't even know that. You talk about not being techie. All right. We're going to try it tonight. All right. See you guys later. Bye. All right. So you guys heard that. We are going to be tech nerds tonight together at 8 o'clock. All right. So, fire show. Thank you, Jester Knight. Will you feed it to Rumble? We are going to be on Rumble. And then we are going to feed it to YouTube and to X. And we are going to try to do it so that the video goes through on both. I'm going to leave it up to them to tell me that that part works, because I can't, it's too much for me from this end to be trying to check all the different feeds and stuff like that. We're really doing this on a low tech budget. And with someone who's trying desperately to try to keep up with the tech. Okay, Mager Sarge, the Colonel posted an expandable picture of her bookshelf a week ago. Yeah, The Strange Tales of the Paramilitary is the previous book. Oh, look at you, Mager Sarge. You're so awesome. Let's see. What to recommend? I told them about Alpha. What you recommend is number 1, Operation Gladio by Paul Williams. Number 2, NATO Secret Army by Danielle Ganser, Ganser. Those are the top 2 books that anybody that wants to know about Operation Gladio needs to read. Look at Maker Sarge. He's already got it out there. You rock, dude. All right. So just keep scrolling. Let Maker Sarge know all of it. Okay. All right. So you guys have got this all taken care of over here. Thank you again for being here. I appreciate it. See you guys tonight at 8.